Oli here, and this is my review of The Hand of Fear, the second story of the 14th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Tom Baker as the fourth Doctor. The Hand of Fear is the 87th story overall, it's 4 parts long, and is written by Bob Baker and Dave Martin. So the plot of The Hand of Fear is as follows. The Doctor and Sarah return to Earth, but are plunged into danger as soon as they step from the TARDIS. They arrive in a quarry rigged with explosive, and the blast leaves Sarah unconscious from the rubble. A fossilized stone is in the fossilized stone hand in her grip. What strange power does the hand have over Sarah Jane? So that is the plot of The Hand of Fear. In my opinion, I think The Hand of Fear is a good story, but it's also a story that's a bit overrated as well because of its faults and the shoddy writing, which I'll get onto in a bit. But it was still a good story, I must say. I mean, the production was very good. I like the location filming of the quarry and how they actually filmed in a real nuclear power station. That was pretty cool, and I like the Castria sets as well. But I wish you saw more of that planet. The script was very good. I think Tom Baker and Elizabeth Staten actually rewrote Sarah Jane's departure because they didn't actually like the original departure that was written, so they did it themselves, and they actually did pretty well. I mean, they pretty much rewrote most of the dialogue back in the Android division. They did a good job as well, so they made it more natural and it showed off the chemistry between the two characters, and it was actually very good. It was very good, and the direction by Lenny Main was good as well, but it could have been better, to be honest. The special effects were good, and I really liked the costuming of both Eldras. I liked the whole crystalline bodysuits they all had. I mean, because they were crystalline based creatures, they looked pretty amazing. Itself was quite good. I mean, I think the Hand of Fear was actually intended to have been this for the season 13 finale, but the script was already in time, so they pretty much had to go with the Seeds of Doom for that season finale. And it was pretty obvious that the Hand of Fear was meant to have aired in season 13 because it does have some elements of season 13, especially with the whole inspiration based on an old sci-fi slash horror movie. And the Hand of Fear was actually based on a 1946 movie entitled The Beast with Five Fingers, which in the plot of that movie pretty much involved a disembodied hand terrorizing the character. And I think the Hand of Fear pretty much covered that aspect well. The possession plot of the story was alright, and how a good portion of the story is actually spent on the quarry and the nearby nuclear sites, especially when Sarah Jane acting possessed by Eldred. It was alright, but I think it hindered the story as well. Well, even though Sarah Jane's departure was a bit abrupt as well, but it was still very well handled, and and obviously Sarah Jane had to leave because the doctor had to go back to Gallifrey, and she couldn't take Sarah. He couldn't take Sarah with her. With her. But I'll get more into that a bit later on. And I think the pacing of the story wasn't really well handled. I mean, part one was alright, but the other three parts were not very good. I mean, I just felt as if I had no idea what was actually going on in some parts. It was just like, what? And I actually think it was a bit rushed, to say the least. And I'll get into why I thought it was rushed in a bit. And this story actually has some very good moments, such as the part one cliffhanger, and that was pretty much the only good cliffhanger in this story. And that cliffhanger pretty much involved Sarah Jane pretty much entering the reactor core room, and then she was just pretty much seated, and then she opens the box in which she put the stone hand in, and then the stone hand pretty much comes to life and transforms into Eldred's actual hand, and it was pretty good as well. I liked how Sarah Jane was pretty much attacking Dr. Carter and some other security guards, and Sarah Jane was like, Eldred must live. Elizabeth Sidden does a great job in this story, and I'll get more into that a bit later. And I also liked the rockfall scene in the beginning, and for some reason it was very visually appealing. So on to the acting. Tom Baker was great here, and I like the fact he's more serious and humorous in this story. The scene where and as I mentioned before, the scene where he and Sarah pretty much making their way to the nuclear site, they were voicing how concerned they were of each other. It was cute. I mean, they pretty much showed the strengths as a doctor companion duo. I also like the scene where the doctor was being examined by one of the doctors in the hospital, and then the doctor was asked where he got his doctorate from or his doctor credentials. The doctor said Gallifrey, and then the other doctor assumed it was an island. I actually thought that was quite funny, and especially how the doctor just went along with it. But understandably, he was concerned about Sarah Jane, so he didn't really have time to answer any questions. And I obviously like how the fourth doctor, pretty much played the part in Sarah's departure scene as well. Elizabeth Sladen was great as well, as I mentioned before. And this is Elizabeth Sladen's last regular appearance instead of Sarah Jane Smith. Even though Sarah Jane is a bit irritable in part 4, she was very good, and I think when she was possessed by Eldred, she acted it very well. And I actually like how she had some good parts to do, especially when she was attacking the security guards and Dr. Carter and acting in her departure scene. And I obviously like how she was able to help the Doctor uh, after he freed her from the possession from Eldred. And I'll get into more on Sarah Jane in a bit. The side cast, they were fairly minimal, but the only noticeable ones were Dr. Carter. He was a pathologist working in the hospital where Sarah Jane was brought in, and when he was actually examining the Eldred's hand when Sarah Jane actually brought it in when she was unconscious, and when Sarah came around, she attacked Carter with the ring, and then I think that's how he became possessed by Eldred. And then once the Doctor was making his way to save Sarah, Carter was there and tried to harm the Doctor by attacking him with a spanner, but then the Doctor moved out of the way, and then Carter pretty much just fell off the balcony and just pretty much fell to his death. And that was a pretty cool scene. I think he was an okay character. We also had Professor Watson. He was the director of the nuclear site and thought that the possessed Sarah Jane was actually a protester of some sorts. But he found out the truth and later allied himself with the Doctor and actually called an RAF strike to try and deal with Eldred after Eldred had found the physical bodily form. But obviously that failed miserably. And I actually like the scene where Watson was calling his family, trying to tell them that, especially his wife, telling her that if he'd kiss the children for me in case something does go bad and he actually ends up dying. I think that's what made me like his character even more. And he actually almost dies at the hands of Eldred because he actually tried to kill Eldred, and Eldred, she tried to mentally kill him, but the Doctor was like, if you kill him, I won't take you back to Castria, and Castria had no choice but to free him, and I think he was a good character. Driscoll, he was the worker at the nuclear site that was later possessed. He died when he went to the reactor core with the hand of Eldred, and that's how Eldred found his or her human form. Rokon, he was a Castrian king, and Eldred wanted to conquer the galaxy. But Rokon didn't want to and told Commander Zaskar, one of the Castrians, to kill him by using 25 spans, but he insisted and used 19 spans, which pretty much caused Eldred to be split all over the universe, time and space, and how Eldred's hand ended up on Earth. So he had a feeling that Eldred would survive, and so he had the Castrians' race bank to be destroyed in case Eldred came back and tried to revive them. And so despite being dead for pretty much the whole story, and he left recordings as well, I think Rokon was a good character to say the least. So our villain was Eldred, the so-called creator of Castria, as he contributed to life on that planet and made it better. As I said before, parts of Eldred were scattered across time and space, and his hand was found by Sarah Jane, and he was able to possess her. Eldred gains the body after a botched nuclear attack by the RAF and gained a body by using Sarah Jane's form. Once he, the Doctor, and Sarah Jane returned to Castria, Eldred was able to find his true form, and that's how he became the true form that pretty much was lasted throughout the last few bits of the story. And after failing to revive the Castrians, he saw Earth as an alternative invasion point, but the Doctor quickly prevented this by causing him to fall into the abyss that Sarah almost nearly fell into. But honestly, I thought Eldred was a weak villain, to say the least. His true intentions didn't actually come up until towards the end of the story. The Doctor quickly just pretty much squandered it. And I actually prefer the Eldred that was played by Judith Paris, as she made Eldred more interesting, and she was definitely more intimidating than the Castrian Eldred. And I do wish the Castrian Eldred was not really in the story, and I preferred if the first Eldred was the main villain in the story, as opposed to this one just coming in the last minute. The faults of the story, and though I actually found quite a few faults in the story. Firstly, I wasn't really a fan of how Sarah Jane was written in part 4. She was very irritable, and I didn't like how vulnerable she was, considering that she came under attack by by an attack that was actually meant to be for Castrians, but then the Doctor pretty much told Sarah that it's not for her because she's a carbon-based life form and not, it was only for the Castrians. So that I didn't really like that part, and I also didn't like how she was like pretty much almost fell into an abyss, and she was like ah, and she was pretty much screaming. I didn't really like that. Just as I said before in previous reviews, it pretty much added to Sarah Jane's vulnerability, and I didn't really like how vulnerable she was compared to like when she first appeared in Doctor Who and later on in Doctor Who. And I didn't really like how she was complaining. I actually thought that Sarah Jane complaining about like her adventures and how she was being attacked by bug-eyed monsters and being shot. I thought that was a little bit out of character, but I understand she was a bit frustrated that the Doctor wasn't listening to her, but it was a bit out of character. I think that's one fault I found with Elizabeth Sladen or Tom Baker's writing, and it pretty much made Sarah Jane a little bit vulnerable and a bit out of character when she was complaining. And then when the Doctor realized that Sarah could not come with him to Gallifrey, he pretty much had to leave her behind. But it was still a good scene. I'll get more into the departure later, but Elizabeth Sladen did well, but it pretty much added to her weakness, and I honestly thought Sarah could have been better written as she was before she actually left. Another thought I have was Eldred himself, and as I said before, Eldred reaching his final form wasn't actually fantastic, and it was defeated very quickly, and I actually think Eldred pretty much reaching his final form was just filler and didn't really add much to the story. And the cliffhangers for part 2 and 3 were very weak and didn't really hold much weight in my opinion. And I think a better cliffhanger option, instead of Eldred being shot by an arrow that was pretty much poisoned him, I think the better option would be to have some Castrians left behind, or they might have detected that Eldred must have come back, and then we see like a whole group of Castrians just confronting the Doctor and Sarah, and then have Eldred like confirm that he was pretty much using the Doctor and Sarah. I think that would have been a better cliffhanger as opposed to that one. So and finally, I found the story to be rather rushed, mainly due to the story that was supposed to have written by Douglas Camfield that would have featured Sarah Jane's death, but I'm glad that actually didn't happen, being held up. But the Castrian plot did seem very rushed, and I think the story would have actually been better if it was a 6-part instead of the 4. It's a 6-part as it was intended to have been instead of the 4 parts it actually was before, and it actually would have worked better because the parts 1 to 3, the first half would have been set on Earth, and then the last 3 parts would have been set on Castria, and obviously at the end of the story, Sarah Jane would have departed as well, and I think that would have been paced better, and I think I would have enjoyed the story a little bit more, to be honest with you. Now, onto the elephant of this room, the departure of Sarah Jane Smith. She leaves the TARDIS because the Doctor was unable to take Sarah Jane to Gallifrey, and he was called back, and obviously humans weren't allowed on Gallifrey, and I assume because of the events of the War Games, that's why humans weren't actually allowed. It was a very sad departure, and I liked how funny it was at the same time, because when the Doctor had taken Sarah Jane to South Croydon, fun fact, we actually live near South Croydon, and Sarah realized that there wasn't actually South Croydon or Hillfield Road, where she actually lived in, and then Sarah was like, oh, he blew it. It was a very funny scene to a very, very sad departure. We actually later find out that Sarah Jane actually ended up in Aberdeen, not in South Croydon. And we actually found that out in the Series 2, the New Who School Reunion, and that's the end of Sarah Jane Smith for now, because she actually does come back a bit later. But I actually think Sarah Jane Smith, and pretty much almost every Whovian pretty much would say this as well, Sarah Jane is pretty much the most iconic, if not the most iconic companion ever, and her story pretty much shows how much of an impact she's made on Doctor Who and the legacy she actually leaves behind. And I'm glad that Sarah Jane actually does come back to Doctor Who, and she returns in the 20th anniversary special, The Five Doctors, and she does play a part in the Russell T Davies era of New Who, but before those two, she does get her own spin-off, Kanan and Company, which pretty much failed, but then she does get another spin-off, another fairly successful spin-off, the Sarah Jane Adventures, which I watched as a child. She was pretty much doing her own adventures as if she was the Doctor, and she had her own Sonic and her own group of teenage companions, and It was doing so well, but it abruptly ended because of Elizabeth Sladen's untimely death back in 2011. So, Sarah Jane, you're an amazing companion, and I really like you. You're really cool. So, despite the flaws of this story, I think the Hand of Fate was actually decent, but I think if it wasn't for Sarah Jane's departure, this story would probably been a flop in my opinion. So, I give the Hand of Fate a 7 out of 10. So, my next review will be The Deadly Assassin, the only Doctor Who story, not classic Who story, to not feature any companions, and it does. Thus, we see Gallifrey in full for the first time, and we see the Master for the first time since, what's the story called again? Frontier in Space. So, thank you for watching this review. Please let me know your thoughts of the Hand of Fear and this review itself, and what you thought of Sarah Jane as a companion, and let me know if you thought about those. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and join my Discord server if you want to. Until then, see you later.